All right. This is Zach Bryan, and welcome back to They Live by Film. This will be our second special episode. With me is Adam and Chris, and we are going to be doing our most pretentious episode ever, where we're going to be deconstructing and judging the top 20 on IMDb and comparing it to how it compares to other lists like, what is it, Letterboxd and everything else. So, how are you guys doing today?
I am fantabulous, as the kids would say.
Yeah, I'm doing great. Yeah, that feels right to call it the most pretentious episode ever. But the IMDb list is all over the place, so it's going to be interesting to kind of see how this conversation goes.
Yeah, like we sort of briefly talked about this before in one of our previous episodes when we went on a bit of a rant about like other like sort of popular directors and stuff. So we kind of touched on the fact that we can be pretentious, not wholly so. You'll kind of see that later on at some point. That we're not completely pretentious, but yeah, we just think it'd be a fun episode to look through the list, compare it to, you know, uh, sort of peer-reviewed lists. We're sort of mainly going to be looking at They Shoot Pictures, Don't They? Because that's like a huge sort of collective ranking of films. So we think that's going to give us our best sort of objective view on where the film should be, because it takes in just so many lists from around the web and just sort of aggregates them into a big ranking.
Yeah, and full disclosure, my life goal is to be included in one of the 13,000 top 100 lists that goes into the weighted rankings for that.
That'd be awesome. Even yeah, if one of us or all of us can get in there, that'd be awesome. Do you know if does the person reach out and ask you?
I don't. I think, Zach, I know we've been talking about this behind the scenes, but I have a personal goal of getting you into the They Shoot Zombies list,
I
which is,
started that, by the way, and I was top 100, and I got to about 20, and I was like, I don't know what to do.
well, keep going. As soon as you get to 100, I'm going to submit on your behalf. I think honestly, I'm just, whenever we feel like we've arrived, whatever that means, I'm just going to submit all of our lists and just see what Bill from Australia does with it. It's just him and his wife that run that project.
Fair. Happy days. Cool. Well, might as well jump straight in then. Okay, so starting off at number 20 on IMDb, we got David Fincher's movie Seven with Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman. So this is coming in at number 20. What do you guys think about that ranking? I know what I think about that ranking, and then you guys know my feelings on David Fincher, so you probably know my ideas on the ranking. But where do you guys sit with that?
They Shoot Pictures has it at 501, and to me that feels high.
As in like high,
it's too high. It should be lower.
Okay, right. So
Yeah,
it's too highly ranked. Okay.
there's no way this is the 20th best film of all time. I I know we're going to kind of summarize like how we feel about this list and how it gets organized at the end, but this to me feels like something where it's a cool idea for sure and an interesting execution for sure. Um, and it's kind of surface level, like there's not like that much depth to it. So I would struggle to put it in the top 1,000, but I get why people dig it. But if you're just getting into movies and the last thing you saw was Hubie Halloween, and then you see Seven, you're like, hey, this is pretty different. This is pretty unique. So I think I could get giving it a high ranking.
It's one of those gateway drug movies, isn't it? When you try and get into
Totally,
cinema. Fincher, again, one of those gateway drug directors when you're like getting into cinema.
totally.
Well, Chris would hate my top 20 already.
Why is Hubie
I
Halloween
do
up there?
like Seven. By the way, on Letterboxd, it is 4.3 out of 5.
Okay,
Um,
pretty.
I struggle to go back and forth with Fincher. My top two of him is Seven's included, but the other one is Zodiac. A lot of it,
Zodiac's
I think,
great.
has a lot of love for true crime stuff. I grew up with that. I'm into it. I love it. I watched all that stuff with my mom growing up. Um, I will agree that it's a very surface level film, but it's nice and gruesome. It's one of those ones that people like to debate whether it's a horror movie or not. I'll throw it in there just because I think it's fun. But yeah, I can understand why you guys wouldn't want a top 20, though. When it comes to Fincher, for me, it's either this one or Zodiac.
And I would definitely go with Zodiac over that. I think Zodiac and The Social Network are probably his two best, like in terms of like pure filmmaking standards, they're like his two best films. Yeah, like we said, I think Seven and David Fincher he's one of those sort of gateway directors, and we'll come across a lot of those in this list. Just one of those gateway directors when you get into film. Like you said, when you compare it to other sort of mainstream stuff, you kind of realize, oh wait, this is what good movies are, and then that's probably why it gets such a high ranking, because people compare it to like a run-of-the-mill thriller.
If we're talking about David Fincher movies, I would put The Game up there as probably one of my favorite of his.
I like The Game.
Mhm.
It's one I don't love just because I wanted more of a game aspect. Like there's two, and I'm not gonna get too far into this. There's two really good parts of it, like talk vaguely. The part about like the window thing where he has to figure out what that piece is, and I think that's
Mhm.
really cool.
Mhm.
But at the end, it's kind of a nice little like gotcha moment at the end, but it does for me. It doesn't really work on rewatches as well.
Interesting. Yeah, I just got that Arrow, the Region B Arrow release, Arrow Academy
Oh yeah,
release.
that looks great.
It's beautiful packaging, and I remember liking the movie. So I'll let you know. I might hate it on rewatch too. I have good memories of it.
Cool. Well, I suppose we'll move on to number 19 then, which is probably getting into more um, more film buff territory. So number 19 is Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai. So I think this is kind of a film that it's not my favorite Kurosawa, but when I think about its importance in film history, and I know it's easy to try and just be objective or subjective when it comes to this kind of stuff, but I do kind of have to think objectively at the same time and think of its importance in cinema. And I think this being in the top 20 is pretty fair. I don't know if you guys agree with me. I think it's like I wouldn't want to say it should be here, it should be there, but if I think of like not necessarily a personal list of my top 20 films, but like if I'm going to talk about the 20 say most important films ever made, I think this being in the top 20 is pretty fair.
Yeah, for
Yeah, I'd
sure.
agree with that. Yeah.
They Shoot Pictures has it at number 10. And I think either one is totally fair. Like, kind of like I think you alluded to this, but when you start talking about the top 50 movies of all time or top 100 even, like it's a lot of subjectivity in that, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not that like there's no way you can say like definitively number 19 or something like that. But I'm fine anywhere this is on a list of a top 20 for sure.
Mm-hmm.
On Letterboxd, it's a 4.5, so it's a little bit up from 7. I know Chris is surprised. um, yeah, like actually haven't watched Seven Samurai probably since I was in high school. I probably need to revisit it, but I really liked it when then, so I'd probably like it more now.
Yeah, it's one of those films that even though it's long, it doesn't feel long. It's fun. It's kind of like another film that we'll come up to later on, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, where even though it's a long film, it never really feels long because it's so fun. So yeah, it's definitely, if you haven't seen it, it's definitely worth watching.
I think for me, like, and the thing I've always loved about Hidden Fortress, Seven Samurai, Yojimbo, and Sanjuro is they sort of they're basically like adventure movies,
Mm.
like they're so fun and easy to watch. Like he has a certain part of his filmography that really seems like it's a John Ford film, like his take on a John Ford movie, and then Spielberg came along later and made a lot of movies with this sense of adventure as well, and it's just yeah, I love it. Like I think that these they're just like you can pretty much put it down with anybody at any given time, and they'll have fun with these movies. And Seven Samurai is the most well known out of all that bunch.
Yeah, I think it's like there's a reason why so many Western directors took a lot from Kurosawa, and it's Seven Samurai is one of the most obvious examples of when like obviously it was pretty much remade as the Magnificent Seven, so it's one of those. Kurosawa is one of those directors, and Seven Samurai is one of those films that even if you haven't seen it, so many of the tropes sort of originated here.
And The Bug's Life too, right?
Yeah, A Bug's Life is also a sort of semi adaptation or remake or whatever you want to call it. So number 18, we got One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest from Milos Forman. Now I'm gonna have to step back because I actually haven't seen One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, so I'm gonna let you guys take the reins on this one.
Have you seen it, Zach?
Yes, I love One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Yeah, I agree. Where would you put it in terms of or how do you feel about it being in the top 20?
Oh, I absolutely think it deserves to be in the top 20. It's not in my top 20, but if we're looking at IMDb as a list of things that, like, how do you want to put things that most people can see, and it'll give them the idea should be to give them a good idea of what they like and stuff like that. I think the good thing about One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is you get, to me, Nicholson's best performance of his career. I don't think that's it's my favorite performance by him. Nurse Ratched is one of my favorite villains in film. They even now have made a TV show thanks to Ryan Murphy.
That dude would make a
But
TV show of anything.
it's just, I have no problem with it being in the top 20. I think it could easily, but I wouldn't be surprised if I heard somebody have it in their top 5, 10, 15, whatever.
Yeah, it's interesting to talk to other film directors and just other people that are like in the industry, how much respect they have for Milos Forman. And just when a few weeks ago this podcast came out where we were interviewing Dennis Bartok, this guy who's been around cinema for his whole life, and he brought up Amadeus as just like the film that just like blew him away. So like there's this sort of respect amongst filmmakers for Milos Forman, and to your point, Adam, about influence of filmmakers and kind of where it fits in history. I certainly don't want to have an opinion on that. I mean that's great. I mean that's I'll go with the people that are in the industry and trust their opinion on that. This was my favorite movie set in a psychiatric ward for a long time until I saw Shock Corridor recently, and I think there's a pulpiness and sort of a little bit more of a fun, or not fun, a little bit more of like an interesting kind of whimsical angle to the work that Sam Fuller does, and I guess I like it a little bit better. But anyways, this movie's amazing. I mean, I'm not going to debate it leaving the top 20.
I think it's got one of my favorite tone switches in film as well, like how quickly things change. And talk about Nicholson all day, but also Brad Dourif, his character in that is fantastic.
Seriously, yeah. It's 113 on They Shoot Pictures, and that's again really gets really hard to pinpoint exactly where it should fall, but to say it's number 18 on one list and 113 on another, it's essentially in the same ballpark. I think they both feel fine to me.
And it has a 4.3 on Letterboxd, which is equivalent to 7s on Letterboxd.
I suppose just to give a bit of context then for the listeners, Chris, who may not be familiar with They Shoot Pictures, some people might say, 113, that's rubbish. Isn't this like a list of like 10,000 films?
Oh, okay, great point. Yeah, we probably should have done that in the beginning. But so They Shoot Pictures is a list, and the most recent edition has over 20,000 films. And basically what it is there's this guy named Bill in Australia who has accumulated over the last 15 years, has accumulated over 13,000 top 100 lists from every country, from critics, from bloggers, from anybody who's like in the industry that's made a top 100 list. He's accumulated them all, and he's put them all into this basic kind of mathematical algorithm he created that weights them and gives a point to each one. And so based on how they score in his weighted ranking, they show up on this top list. And so if you think about that, to get in the top 1,000, it means that it's still pretty impressive, right? Because it means that your film has shown up on 13,000 critics from all over the world, different points in history, has shown up on their top 100 lists enough to where the weighted average of it puts it in the top 1,000 out of 20,000 odd films.
Yeah, so 113 is definitely not a slight when you think of the greater context of the format.
Great point. That's so true.
Cool. So on to number 17, which is Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas. I like Goodfellas a lot. I think it's a really, really great film. I'm not again, kind of like Fincher, and I spoke to you guys before about Coen brothers. Like, I'm not a huge Scorsese guy. I don't not like any of his films, but at the same time, I don't really actively seek out his films. But when I do watch them, and the ones I have seen, they've always been really good. And Goodfellas is definitely one of those ones that is a really, really good film. It's really well crafted. The script is great. The characters are all really, really great. I don't know if I'd have it in my again, top 20 doesn't seem too bad really, because it's a really, really great picture. What do you guys think of Goodfellas? Do you like Goodfellas?
Zach, you take this
Well,
one. I
I
haven't
kind of.
seen it. Yeah, go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
No, I was gonna say you take this one because I haven't seen it in 20 years, and my memory of it is kind of light. So I don't want to say too much.
Well, I'm gonna go ahead. Letterboxd has it at a 4.4, which would be second so far from what we've had, right behind Seven Samurai. I like Goodfellas. I don't. I want to put that out there. I think it's a good movie. I think it plays kind of as a fun antithesis to The Godfather because they're giving very different perspectives of the Italian mafia and all that good stuff. So they're kind of interesting to watch back and back because we're going to get to The Godfather, I'm sure, here pretty soon. Um, it's not my favorite Scorsese film by far. I don't think it's as good as I think Goodfellas is. I think it ends up on the top 20 because of how fun it is. I think you have great Joe Pesci performance, Ray Liotta, all of them are great in it. But I wouldn't put it above The Silence or Taxi Driver or Bringing Out the Dead. Those are usually my three top Scorsese films. But I think it's good. I think it's fine. I think it's a good film to watch. I think it's a good introduction to Scorsese, if nothing else.
Okay.
Hmm. And I'll just say that it's number 68 on They Shoot Pictures, so we seem to be in some kind of loose alignment here. That it's not offensive to have it there.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Next one I think will be controversial. At number 16, we have The Matrix by the Wachowskis. This is probably the first one that we've come across now where I'm adamant that this film should be nowhere near a top 20 list. It was revolutionary for its time in terms of its special effects, but the plot is just like someone flicked through a philosophy book once and said, I'm going to try and make a sci-fi film out of these ideas. And yeah, Keanu does Keanu things. The action's kind of cool, even though it hasn't really aged amazingly. The action sequences, but yeah, I think this film is just fine. Like it's not bad, but it shouldn't be anywhere near a top 20.
So They Shoot Pictures has it at 291. And I feel like that feels a little too high for me. So I remember when I was, I don't know if y'all are old enough to remember this, but I remember driving around Dallas area before The Matrix came out, and they had this really innovative advertising campaign saying like, "What is The Matrix?" And it sounds so simple, but it was extremely effective because before people knew it was a movie, before people knew it was anything, they were willing to plaster big cities with these billboards trying to get hype around this idea of like what this is, and they used the internet early on to sort of gain hype for the movie, and it worked. Like it just kind of caught the country by storm, right? By the time people figured out it was a movie, there was people kind of that just got obsessed over figuring out what this was and the themes and like everything. So by the time the movie came out, it was a masterful job of building towards. It was like a big event, basically, right? It was much more than a movie. It was a big event, and to deliver a film that's above average after that big hype, I think people just like fell in love with it because it wasn't like a bad movie, right? Like it's not. I agree, the special effects haven't aged as great, and like whatever, but it wasn't a bad movie. Like it was a well-made film, really pushed special effects, kind of like James Cameron, what he does, right? Like the stories aren't really the point of a James Cameron movie. It's sort of like it's Titanic, it's about the history. If it's Avatar, it's about like the kind of special effects that he creates. Like I feel like for me, they fit into that category of people that are using a decent story and pushing the envelope of what can be done from the visual medium. And they unfortunately they didn't carry that out for the rest of their career, I don't think. But this Matrix stands alone in that, and the other films aren't on here for a reason. I think they struggled to finish the series. I think if we're looking at this as a single film, that would have probably been higher for me. But the movies get harder and harder to watch, I think, as they go along as well.
Letterboxd has it at a 4.1, which I do think is a little bit more fair. I still wouldn't give it a 4 personally. I think it's a movie with a ton of potential. I think it's got a lot of interesting ideas. It has a lot of interesting aspects to it, but I hadn't seen this movie in probably 10 or 12 years, and I really don't have a wanting to rewatch it anytime soon. I remember a pretty good amount. I guess that means a lot that you can still remember something 10 or so years later. But yeah, it's fine. I think a lot of it comes from the reason it's ranked so high is because this coming out in 1990. IMDb was probably starting to get some traction, at least a little bit of traction at the time as a web browser, because I think it came out in the early 90s. Not a web browser, but a website. And I think that skews this, and I think we'll get to another one that I think it's kind of skews that result a lot higher, simply because it was a really big movie at the time. The people using IMDb just really liked it, and it's just kind of stayed there because of that.
Mm. Is it better than 7? I don't think it's better than 7.
No, it's not better than 7.
Okay,
No.
that's cool. I'm glad you guys are in agreement with that, because not just IMDb, but obviously They Shoot Pictures has it a lot sort of higher than 7, and I don't think it's better than 7. So, number 15, which is, yeah, it's probably one of my favorite films to watch in terms of like the nostalgia value and everything like that, and that is Irvin Kershner, who you would forget he directed it because it's so synonymous with another man. It's Star Wars Episode 5, Empire Strikes Back. Like, I am the biggest Star Wars fan. I love Star Wars. I've loved Star Wars since I was a kid. One of my earliest memories is going to see The Phantom Menace on my 5th birthday. I love Star Wars. It's not the 15th best film ever made. No Star Wars film should be anywhere near the top 20 of best films ever made. But I love Empire Strikes Back, and I think this is where we're kind of seeing the list become skewed towards popularity rather than craft and, you know, how good the actual film is from a filmmaking standpoint. But yeah, I love Empire Strikes Back. I'm not going to say anything bad about it except for the kind of iffy time logic about Luke's training versus Han and Leia flying around. Doesn't really match up. But you're not going to make me say anything bad about Empire Strikes Back, so I'll let someone else take the reins.
We don't have to, luckily. So They Shoot Pictures has it at 283, which to me feels fair. But if you look at Irvin Kershner's career, I think that says enough. We don't have to say anything else. So he did Empire Strikes Back. Next film was a Bond movie, Never Say Never Again, which was so panned, I guess, and not loved, that his next movie was RoboCop 2, and that was the only thing he ever directed again.
I bet Zach loves that one.
No. Though I will give this slight fun fact about Kershner. He got the job for Empire Strikes Back because of his movie Eyes of Laura Mars. And George Lucas loved the screening of that movie so much, he asked him to direct the second Star Wars movie, which I think is really interesting and random.
I just always think, like, with the ego that George Lucas has, it must kill him that the only movie showing up on top list is one that he didn't direct.
Yeah, I can't even remember who directed Return of the Jedi. It wasn't Lucas again. It was supposed to be David Lynch, and then he did Dune instead.
I think it's Christopher Columbus.
I don't think it was Christopher
No,
Columbus.
I'm just kidding.
I was going to say.
That's our go-to for Richard Marquand.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have no idea who that is. I don't know if I don't know if you guys have come across him before. I'm curious.
I'm looking at his filmography. I don't recognize anything.
Mm-mm.
Okay, fair. It must just, again, one of these sort of studio stooges where Lucas knew he could just sort of pull this guy's strings and just got him in. I suppose it's kind of like the MCU effect with sort of Kevin Feige. You know, he gets these like up and coming directors because he knows that he'll be able to sort of, you know, pull their strings, which is fine. Like I'm a big MCU fan as well. You're not going to hear me shitting on that either. So, yeah, it just seems like probably one of those things where Lucas wanted someone in who he knew he could sort of, you know, direct them on where he wanted to go vision wise. What's the letterbox on this? I don't know if did you say the letterbox? Forgive me if you did.
It's a 4.4. A little high for me. I'm not the biggest Star Wars fan, granted, but yeah, 4.4.
Even as a Star Wars fan, I can look at things objectively, and yeah, it's probably a bit high. Okay. Well, I suppose we go from one huge franchise to another huge franchise. Coming in at number 14 is the second Lord of the Rings film, The Two Towers. Obviously, Peter Jackson. So now this is my favorite Lord of the Rings film, and all three will show up on this list, just as a bit of a spoiler warning.
Should we just talk about all three now?
Yeah, actually, let's just get it out of the way. So yeah, number 14 is The Two Towers. Number 10 is Fellowship of the Ring, and number 7 is Return of the King. And I would kind of have all of those backwards, maybe. Fellowship and Return of the King maybe is kind of hard to judge. I think the problem with Return of the King is that the film should be like half an hour shorter because the
Exactly.
ending just doesn't know how to end. But I think Two Towers is the best of the three easily, personally.
I do too. I love Two Towers. And you just to speak kind of generally about Lord of the Rings. I love Lord of the Rings. I'm extended edition sort of guy.
Yeah.
While I could, my bias is going to be I at least to think at least one of these in some way should be in it, just because of the craft and um, the the passion behind it, and you can see that passion just dwindle away with The Hobbit. But Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, you can just feel the passion in a project that cost so much money and was such a big deal. I just love it. I'm a huge fan of it. I would also put Two Towers first. Fellowship has grown on me on rewatches as I've gotten older, but I'd probably still slightly put Return of the King above it, just because I just like the battles. And
I was about to say, I
Fellowship.
think Fellowship kind of gets a short straw because of battle bias. There's no like huge battle in Fellowship. There's only really like the fight with the Uruk-hai at the end is the only
Yeah.
real battle. So I think the other ones get kind of battle bias because Two Towers, there's like, yeah, Helm's Deep, it's fucking awesome. And then obviously with Return of the King, you have the Pelennor Fields, again, awesome. And it kind of gets battle bias in that sense. I would kind of struggle to decide because I agree. Fellowship I think is really cool, especially the Mines of Moria scenes. I think they're really really well done. Yeah, and when you talk about like just pure cinematic scope of these films, you know, from what Peter Jackson was able to achieve by taking these books that were deemed unfilmable and really doing a great job at adapting them. Just in terms of like the pure scope and even going beyond what's in the books, you know, a lot of this stuff that's in the films is way more cinematic than what's in the books, some of which is pretty low key, especially some of the battles. So I have a major respect for them. I'm not going to say that they should be or shouldn't be in the top 20, but I have a major respect for what Peter Jackson was able to achieve with the films.
Yeah, I was a bit obsessed with Tolkien for a while, and the Lord of the Rings books I definitely grew up with. And so, when I found out that the guy that directed Bad Taste and Dead Alive was gonna translate them into a movie, I remember thinking like, okay, this is either gonna be really great because he can capture kind of some of the horror in the battle, or just like really bad. Like, what is this guy doing?
That part in Fellowship where Bilbo like turns when he sees the
Oh
ring
yeah,
after like that is like the scariest thing.
ah
It
man,
scared me to death as a kid.
yeah, same here.
Yeah, and that's kind of the beauty. Like, I think he brought, in a weird way, as cinematic and grand and scope as everything was, he brought a very like handheld kind of feel to a lot of the scenes as well, which I think it needed, right?
Yeah,
He pulled back to show the weight and like the magnitude of everything that was going on, but he also like zoomed in really well on like the
It's a
individual characters.
personal story for so many characters, and I think that's a bad habit of a lot of big epics is we want to show you the spectacle, but ignore what the movie is really about. And I think that's why Lord of the Rings has resonated with people still, is
Yeah.
because of that.
Yeah, the last 40 minutes of Return of the King is so bad.
I blame that on Tolkien, but yeah, I wish he had done some changes there.
yeah.
Just not, and just cut it out. Like, you don't need it,
He doesn't know where to end it. Yeah,
but I'm sure, paying respect and what, anyways, I'm sure there's a reason it was in there. But yeah, as much as it pains me to say it, I don't think any of these movies belong in the top 20 of all time, but I could watch them anytime. And I'm like, y'all, I'm an extended edition guy. Like, I could watch 6 hours of each of these movies, and yeah, I'm not going to be angry that they're there, but I don't think they're the top 20 films of all time.
yeah.
And
It's
for
kind of
anyone
crazy.
who has somehow not seen the extended, the secondary antagonist isn't even finished in the theatrical. Like, you don't actually know what happens to him if you just watch the theatrical.
Yeah, I was literally about to say this. It's insane that people watch this film and don't know what happened to Saruman. That's like the most insane part because I'd only ever seen the extended. I didn't get to see any of these in theater, which I'm pretty bummed about. Um, But when I got the DVDs, I always got the extended versions, so I had never seen the theatrical ones until I had like gone to friends' houses and they had just the theatrical versions, and I'm going watching Return of the King, going, but they skipped the bit with Saruman. What's going on?
It,
And yeah, it was the same when they came on. They came onto Netflix about 2 years ago
mhm.
here in Ireland. They came onto Irish Netflix all in one day, and I happened to be off work that day, and I was kind of sick, and so I wasn't doing anything. So I literally sat down at 11 a.m. and watched all three back to back, which was pretty wild. I did it more for the sake of I'm gonna tell all my friends I'm doing this, and then I got to the end of Two Towers and like I just I need to finish what I started. It was kind of like Frodo and Sam. I need to
Exactly.
finish what I started. But yeah, they were the theatrical versions, not the extended. So there's just so much stuff cut out, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah, and it's a different ending than it is in the book. I'm not going to get into the differences in the book. And there's a whole like if you want to think the end of Return of the King is long a movie, the book is way worse. Like they didn't even get into where the war goes to the Shire and all that. They cut that
Yeah,
out. Needed to be, but it's just kind of weird because Christopher Lee was the pretty much the expert Tolkien guy on set. So it was kind of weird not to end his character because that was kind of the big thing for him was he loved Tolkien. He's the one that he apparently read until his death read Lord of the Rings every single year. If they had a question about Tolkien, they asked him. That was pretty much why he was hired, and he's a good actor.
Okay, well, I suppose we could probably talk about Lord of the Rings for the next 3 hours, so I
Yeah.
suppose we better move on at some point. Before we do, what's the rankings on these three
Oh
from?
yeah, good point. Good point. Okay, so
I'm just
the
curious to see if they're in the same order.
so the highest rated one on They Shoot Pictures is gonna be Fellowship of the Ring at 755,
Okay,
Return of the King at 900, and Two Towers at 1192.
so they basically have it in chronological order. On
Yeah.
the highest rate is the first.
And
Okay.
actually, I know we're kind of done like editorializing here, but I just have to say, like, I kind of agree with that because I think the thing that, like, Fellowship of the Ring, I totally agree, it gets passed over by everything y'all were saying, but it sets the tone of like what you're about to watch is a faithful adaptation of this amazing Tolkien novel. And I think just that first hour is so important of capturing not only the kind of fanboys, fangirls, but then also making it interesting and engaging as just a general movie, which is so hard to do.
Yeah.
In a Letterboxd, Two Towers and Fellowship are both at 4.3, and Return of the King's at 4.4.
Okay. So again, we're not really seeing any obvious correlation except for that the Two Towers is sort of rated at least sort of the same as Fellowship, and Return of the King is perhaps better, but we're seeing that on two different lists. Interesting. I suppose they're kind of like a series that you can't take one without the other. They're obviously all three are integral to one another, really. So it's hard to sort of judge them separately too much. Okay, so we'll move on to number 13, which is a film that is exceptionally important to me because this was my gateway drug into film as an art form, as serious cinema. Before this film came out, I just kind of watched movies for entertainment. I'm the kind of guy who would have gone and seen Transformers movies in the theater. Like I've gone out of my way to see Transformers 2 in the theater before this film came out, and it changed my whole perception on cinema, and that is Inception from Chris Nolan. So I love Inception to pieces. I'm not going to sit here and say it should be in the top 20. It's in my top 20 purely for nostalgia and how important it was to me, in terms of getting into film. And I still think it's an exceptionally well-made film, if obviously not perfect. So I'm kind of interested to see what you guys. I know we sort of talked about Nolan on a podcast a few weeks ago, and we sort of touched on Nolan as a filmmaker. So I'm curious to hear what you guys think of Inception.
I remember seeing it in theaters, and similar experience to you. I was kind of floored. I thought about it for a long time after. They Shoot Pictures has it ranked at 1022, and I think 1022, and I think what this film means to me is really hard to put like a ranking or a number on because I still think about that top spinning from time to time. Like
Yes, at the
there's
end.
just like yeah, like early Christopher Nolan, like The Following, Memento, except like you're watching this guy's career and you're like, who is this guy? He's amazing. Like, he's a freaking genius. Like, everything he does is interesting, and I don't know. I'm gonna be a little bit biased. At some point, I probably should go back and rewatch all these to see how they age. But I have no problem with somebody putting it in their top 20. It's not in mine, but I'm not gonna fight it.
And just to put it on here on Letterboxd, it's a 4.2, so it'd be the second lowest we've had so far. So it's better than The Matrix. Don't worry.
Woohoo!
Um, I Inception's one I struggle with because I love the concept of it, like how well the world is put together and how visually appealing the special effects are. I just find the characters tremendously hollow, and that's a problem in a lot of Nolan films. But I
Yeah,
just
for
feel
sure.
it so much in Inception. Like, I just don't care. Like, it has Tom Hardy, who's one of my favorite actors. It has Leo. It's got Joseph Gordon-Levitt. It's got a great cast, and I just don't care about any of them.
Yeah, I think you highlight that. It's a problem in a lot of Nolan's films. His characters are often there a lot just to serve a function. It's more so obvious in Tenet because the main character is literally called the protagonist. He doesn't have a character name. That is, he is billed as the protagonist. But I think in Inception, they all sort of they kind of have. It's kind of like in a slasher movie. You know the way you have the bimbo, you have the jock, you have the nerd. In Inception, they kind of have that too. They have the architect. They have
Mm-hmm.
the Tom Hardy's guy who's kind of like, I can't remember what title they gave them all, but they all had like these specific titles, and they were in they were sort of pigeonholed into these roles, and this was their role, this was their function in the film. I think Dom Cobb, who is Leo DiCaprio's character, is probably the most in depth because obviously he has that. His character has that sort of internal struggle with coming to terms with his wife's suicide, which was probably his fault. So I think there is a bit of depth to his character, especially towards the end, where people probably pay too much attention to the spinning top when they should be kind of more thinking about, Cobb's character has kind of come full circle here, and he has overcome his issues that were, that were there throughout the film. So I think Leo's character is probably with the strongest, but the rest of them do very much fall into this is your function, this is what you're in this film to do. You don't have any depth other than that kind of way. I still love the film though.
Oh
it's
yeah,
it's
I
so well
understand why people
crafted.
love it.
It's so well crafted, especially
And
like
it,
sorry, go ahead, Zach.
no, I was gonna say it's just interesting because after this, Nolan kind of becomes kind of decisive among people who talk about his films after Inception. Like, I like Interstellar more, but I have seen so many people despise that movie, and I get that. Like, it's a extremely flawed movie, but I like Matthew McConaughey, and I like his character a lot more than the ones in Inception, even if it's not as, I guess, tight of a script or tight as a concept.
Yeah, Interstellar is good. I've no qualms with Interstellar. Again, it's not perfect, but it's really well crafted. I think you can probably say it about every Chris Nolan film. In terms of the technical aspect, it's so well crafted. I really respect his want for to always try and do everything as non CGI as possible. Like in Inception, the hallway scene, he took a page out of Stanley Kubrick's book and literally just got a hallway and got it spinning around while stunt guys were in there. Like the hallway scene isn't CGI. You have the truck flip in The Dark Knight where he said, "I'm just going to flip a truck." I respect him for that because a lot of major Hollywood directors wouldn't do that. They would go down the CGI route. So I do respect him for being a bit more old school. But after Inception, he became a very much of a concept guy. It's all about the concept with his films, and a lot of the time he becomes too married to those concepts. We talked about it before in an earlier episode with Dunkirk, how he became so married to a concept it crutched the rest of the film and how it could breathe and sort of develop naturally. So yeah, again, Inception, it's not a perfect film. I love it for personal reasons, but I completely understand why other people wouldn't have it in their top 20. Any more on
Chris,
Inception?
where was it ranked at?
Oh
1022
yeah,
is what you said?
1022.
Yeah,
Yeah.
1022. No,
I
I
think
mean,
that's fair. I don't know if
yeah,
other people. I think that's pretty fair.
that seems fair. I think that, I don't want to spoil it here for the end, but I think this is a great example of this list being geared towards, like, this IMDb list is kind of, biased towards people that are discovering film, discovering interesting movies, and like people that just watch a lot of movies, and like if this is one of those ones you see early on, you're like, oh, this is different. Like this is really cool.
Yeah, exactly. One of those films where when you're first getting into film, you kind of it's like a watershed film where you realize, oh, this is what a good movie is. Which was my reaction to it. Going from just watching normal popcorn movies to sitting down in front of this and going, oh, so this is what a good movie is. Then obviously, developing tastes from there. And we're going to move on to number 12, which is a film that I don't like. And that's going to be a very, very controversial thing to say that I don't like, which is Forrest Gump from Robert Zemeckis at number 12. What do we think of Forrest Gump? I think it's just kind of one of those nostalgic films, isn't it? That people just watched growing up and they like it because of that.
Oh boy. Okay, so I guess just for the facts, They Shoot Pictures has it at 492. It's not in the top 20 there.
Not better than Inception, but okay.
I'm a little bit biased. I have I don't know if y'all know this about me, but I have a master's in counseling, so I could be a counselor, a therapist. I chose not to go that route, which is a different podcast. But any film that depicts, like Rain Man is another example of this. Any film that depicts sort of fringe mental health conditions typically does it poorly, or is at least pretty reductive in the way that they do it, and they use it a lot of times as like a bit or as like a way to tell a bigger story. I think the attempt was there to do it the right way with Forrest Gump. I don't want to make too much of it. But I do think it was a bit exploitive, and I think that it's one of those films that as so there's this like kind of guidebook or a Bible that's used to diagnose mental health conditions, and every 20 years or so it gets refreshed with the updated definitions, and I think that I guess I'm going to be a little biased against this movie just for the way that they used a character with limited kind of mental capacity for a lot of the storytelling devices, and I think they're trying to even say it as like in a like look what he was able to do kind of thing. Like I think that was like a big theme here of like look what somebody with limited ability was able to do. But I don't know. I guess this is a bit of a sore topic for me. I don't like it when those kind of things are exploited, and I think I think this is a bad example of that. Like just to kind of get an emotional reaction and just for sentimentality's sake. And I thought it was a bit cheap. So I guess I'm going to be down on this movie a little bit more than some others.
I'm really glad you said that. That's exactly how I feel, and I'm glad you brought up the word exploitative because, and I don't feel it's exploitative. Well, it is exploitative of the fact that he's mentally disabled, and I think it's exploitative in another way as well, and that's emotionally exploitative. I don't know if you guys have seen the series This Is Us. It's a pretty big series over in the States. I can't remember what channel it's on, but it works in a similar way to this film, that everything that happens is specifically designed to get the biggest emotional reaction out of the viewer.
Mm-hmm.
It's nothing really happens because it's good for the story or it should happen organically. It's the writer sat down and said, how can we make the viewer feel sad or feel happy or feel or want to cry? It's specifically designed to exploit emotion from the viewer, which is fine if you're maybe telling a sad story like a Holocaust story that we'll get to later in the list. But when you're doing it specifically to literally to make your film, to try and ingratiate the film onto people just by trying to elicit emotional reaction, then you sort of lose cred with me. That's how I feel about the film.
So I'm probably going to end up being the slightly more positive one. Adam, you mentioned nostalgia. This is definitely nostalgic for me. This was, this came out in '94. That was the year I was born. So I grew up with watching this film a lot. I definitely feel what you're saying. I work with kids for a living. I work with kids who've dealt with certain things. So I understand the idea of exploitation that you were mentioning, Clarisse. The only thing with the exploitation and emotion is that doesn't really bother me because I think all films to some degree are designed that way. I think that's the point of film, is to emotionally manipulate you to a degree. So that doesn't really bother me too much. It's definitely melodramatic, and I think it's designed to be. It's good. I wouldn't put it in my top 20, top 50, or probably even my top 100 or 200, 250 or whatever. But I like it just fine. I think it's a good snapshot in the views of that time. Because I mean, obviously, the sensibilities we have of these 27 years later is a little bit different than we would have then, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I will say that Bob Zemeckis did Romancing the Stone, the Back to the Future movies, and Death Becomes Her right before this, and all of those I would happily put above Forrest Gump.
I do agree with that.
I hate Death Becomes Us. That's the one with Goldie Hawn and is it Goldie Hawn? No. As Death Becomes Her, sorry.
Death Becomes Her is Meryl Streep, Bruce Willis. Goldie Hawn's in it. No,
Yes, it is Goldie. Yeah, Goldie Hawn and Meryl Streep. That's a terrible movie. Sorry.
Yeah, I see your 1 star on Letterboxd.
Yeah, I had to watch. My girlfriend made me watch that a few months ago. That was dreadful. It was just the most anti-feminist movie ever.
Maybe I'll have to go back and rewatch it. I have good memories of it.
It's basically just Meryl Streep and Goldie Hawn fawning over Bruce Willis, who is in no way a good character either. He's just this horrible little dweeb of a character, and they're both fawning over him the whole film. It's very, very anti-feminist in my opinion. But that's a whole other podcast. What was the letterbox on this one? Sorry, before we move on. Forrest Gump.
4.1, I believe. I exited out of it.
That's the new lowest, I think. Then is it from what we've
It's
talked about so
tied with
far?
Matrix.
Tied with the Matrix. Okay, so we haven't gone below a 4, and I'll be surprised. Looking at the rest of this list, I'll be surprised if we go below a 4. But we'll go on to the next one, which is another David Fincher film, one that I loved when I was a teenager and despise now because it's we'll go into it. It's Fight Club. I won't start this time. What do you guys think of Fight Club?
I'm a huge Chuck Palahniuk fan. He's one of my favorite authors, so I guess I'll take it. It's got a 4.3. As far as, I agree with you, Adam, that this was something I loved, especially when I was a teenager, as I got older. And I still rewatch it, and I still enjoy it for what it is. It definitely loses its message within, which is supposed to be the idea that, toxic masculinity and domestic terrorists are bad, but Tyler Durden kind of becomes this icon that he isn't ever supposed to be. So that's kind of interesting to watch now. But the book is actually pretty interesting to read. I like the movie better, which I think Chuck Palahniuk also agrees with, since he didn't come up with the famous twist until he was 2/3 done writing the book. But yeah, it's fine. I wouldn't put it in my top anything, but I don't hate it. I just liked it more years ago than I do now.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat about the sort of mixed messages that it brings across, especially the toxic masculinity. That's a huge point about this film. And also, apparently the film is supposed to be anti-consumerist while plastering brands every 5 seconds. Like literally, I don't know if this is true, I've never actually tried to look it up myself, but apparently there's a Starbucks coffee cup in every scene of this film.
Yes, that's the joke. Yeah, it's in every single scene.
And like, that's all well and cool, but like, if you're trying to be anti-consumerist, like that probably was huge for Starbucks. That probably gave them a ton of business rather than the opposite way around.
They bomb a Starbucks at one point, don't they?
Yeah, they do. Which again, they have I think they throw like a burning something true.
Well, it's the statue ball. I think it crushes into it. Yeah.
Yeah, it crashes into the Starbucks, which is big and plastered, and their logo is right there. So, it's supposed to be an anti-consumerist film, but yet I'd say Starbucks and IKEA paid them a ton of money to put all their shit in the film. So, yeah, that rubs me the wrong way as well.
They live by film sponsored by Starbucks and IKEA.
If they want to send me another Billy shelf, they surely can.
Yeah, seriously, I need one too.
I'll be moving into my new house soon, so I need all their shit. So IKEA, send me free stuff.
427 on They Shoot Pictures. I think that feels right. To be honest, again, I guess I'd have to watch it again. It's been over 10 years, but I don't remember having anything extremely terrible about it. I feel like it's another one of those movies that helps you kind of understand what can be done with storytelling in film. And I think there's, as you get more, I think as people watch more and more movies, I think we just watched Xiao Wu recently for the film club. and I think that nothing really happens in that movie, right? But so if I were to watch that movie at 18, I would have been pissed at it. I know for sure, and I would have liked Fight Club much better. But 20 years later, as just seeing so many more movies, I see something like Shawu, and it just feels like there's so much going on, and the subtlety of the storytelling and the subtlety of the way that the characters interact. And so to me, that's like the difference, I think, of just depending on kind of how many movies you've seen of where that stuff falls. Yeah, it's not in my top 20, but yeah, I have no problem with it being with people liking it, and if they view it, rate it high, rank it high on IMDb, that feels fair.
Yeah, I think it just kind of falls into the same problem that Taxi Driver does, and I love Taxi Driver, but the idea that people don't kind of, and I agree with you, Adam, that the message is kind of muddled in itself, but people who watched it made that message a lot more muddled, and it's the same thing with Taxi Driver, where people don't really get the point of what they're going for, and there is always blame for the director for that as well, but it definitely gets highlighted more
Like
with audience members.
The holy trilogy of incel cinema is Taxi Driver, Fight Club, and Joker. Has to be.
Yeah.
And what was the letterbox on this? Sorry, before we move on.
4.3.
4.3. Did you say that already? Apologies if you did.
I don't think I did, but I've
Okay.
said 4.3 a few times, so I can't remember.
Cool. So we've already covered number 10, which was Fellowship of the Ring. So we'll skip on down to number 9, which I mentioned briefly earlier. Sergio Leone's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Zach, I know you're a big Leone fan, so I'm going to let you start off with this one.
This has a 4.4 on Letterboxd, and that is way too low. But no, it's a great film. It's you mentioned it earlier that it's one of those films that is super long but it never feels it. Like I can sit down and watch that movie many times. I have probably watched the final showdown on YouTube or other things like thousands of times. Everything about it to me is just constructed so perfectly for such a low budget movie. To everything from the score, from the scale, from the characters, it's just all fantastic.
Yeah, it's an excellently crafted movie. It's not my favorite of the Dollars trilogy. Fistful of Dollars is still my favorite. It's a 3. But that's just more so from just a personal point of view. Like Good, Bad, the Ugly it's one of those sort of god tier films. I have no problem with it being in the top 20. It wouldn't be in my top 20, but I have no problem with being in a general top 20. I've zero problem with that.
Yeah, just to pile on the love here. So it's 138 on They Shoot Pictures. I feel like that's too low. I feel like it could
easily top 100 at least anyway.
Yeah, exactly. I don't really have any flaws in this film that I can find. I mean, I kind of like you, Zach. I love Leone, and I think that what he's able to do as far as just keeping stories engaging and he does so much with silence that I just think he's wonderful. I love it, and I mean, yeah, we could either do a whole other episode just on Leone film or just on this film, but this feels right to me.
Yeah, I suppose the question for me, because obviously a few weeks ago we talked about Once Upon a Time in the West, part of the film club. Is this better? Is this better than Once Upon a Time in the West?
Yes.
Okay, there we go. There we go, folks.
That's the one Leone film that Zach doesn't like. I don't know. Once Upon a Time in the West is so cool, but this was, I don't know. It's maybe a toss up for me, but depending on the mood, either one goes.
Yeah. No, they're both great films. Probably Good, Bad, Ugly probably does edge it out just in terms of there's less. Well, I can't think of any real flaws in it from a film, whereas I can think of flaws in Once Upon a Time in the West. So, number 8, we have another one of those big sort of threshold breaking films for people who want to get into film. Quentin Tarantino with Pulp Fiction. Pulp Fiction, I like Pulp Fiction. I've no problem with it. Again, like other directors I'd mentioned, like Scorsese and Coen Brothers and Fincher, I can kind of take them or leave them. Don't think there's been any Tarantino films I actively dislike. There's none that I absolutely sort of love. Although Pulp Fiction, again, sort of like Fight Club, was one of those ones I really loved as a teenager. It was one of those sort of early serious films, if we'll call it that, that I got into. And I think that's the same for a lot of people. Tarantino's just one of those directors that people get into really early in their sort of film journey. Yeah, what do we think of Pulp Fiction? I don't think it's perfect. I think the pacing is not great. The whole Bruce Willis subplot I don't think is very good. What do you guys think of it?
So 64 and they shoot pictures.
Okay, I think it's a bit high for me personally, but okay.
Yeah, I could totally see an argument that that's too high. So Tarantino used to work at a video store in Austin, briefly. He is somebody who is doing everything he can to promote film history and preservation. Like even in the references in his movies, the work he does outside of his movies, he's like a true sort of, somebody who loves cinema that happened to have the ability and the luck and the kind of mind to go make movies. So I mean, unless he just starts producing absolute dog shit, like I'm gonna be a big defender of Tarantino, just for like what he's trying to do, his mission. I think he's a quirky dude, but aren't we all? I guess on some level. Pulp Fiction, being in people's top 10 list, it doesn't bother me. It's not in mine. I think it's almost like I view Tarantino as like the world's best cover band. Like they're still a cover band, right?
Yes.
But he knows more about film than probably anybody in the world, and he's probably seen more movies than almost anybody alive, and he does his best to kind of pull the bits and pieces from what he's seen and make a coherent story out of it. And I think this is a fun example of that genre.
On Letterboxd, it's a 4.4. Let me go ahead and get my hot take out of the way. This is probably one of my least favorite Tarantino. It's one of those movies I absolutely appreciate for what it did. I think it's incredibly influential. If we're going to go based on influence, Pulp Fiction is probably at the top, if not the very top, as far as how much it influenced the 90s and stuff in that sense. But as you mentioned, Adam, I just don't care about most of the story. Anything with Samuel Jackson and John Travolta, that part's great. Yeah. Everything else, I don't care. Like it's when I want to skip half the movie, I just can't really sit there. It's not the one I rewatch. If I'm gonna watch a Tarantino film, it's gonna be Jackie Brown or Django Unchained or even Reservoir Dogs. I think those are much stronger.
Inglourious Bastards.
I love Inglourious. Honestly, there's not a Tarantino I dislike, but just Pulp Fiction is one of my least favorites.
Yeah, Inglourious Bastards is kind of underrated, I think, in his overall because of how much foreign languages are in the film. I think like 70% of the film is in either French or German, so a lot of people sort of deter away from it based on that. But I think Inglourious Bastards is probably his best film, and I think even Tarantino probably thought that himself. I don't know if you remember the end of the film. But it has Brad Pitt going into, I think this may be my masterpiece. So, Tarantino's a cool guy. He's a fiercely intelligent guy, as you said, Chris. He absolutely knows so much about cinema. I think the cover band aspect that you brought up is definitely something that with him. And for me, I think he kind of oversteps the line between homage and then just straight ripping off. I think he just does it a bit too much. Pretty much anything that a new film fan would say is innovative about Tarantino, he probably took from someone else, and they were probably French. So, that's sort of my feelings towards Tarantino. Super intelligent guy, but a lot of the time for me, he kind of oversteps the line of homage into straight up he's just ripping off stuff.
I've always thought he's like the world's most interesting film history textbook.
Yeah. But I think the problem with it, though, is that a lot of his references aren't obvious. You would have to actively seek out what he's referencing to get it. That's where, for me, he kind of goes into the line of, okay, Tarantino, you've seen films and you're just taking stuff from random sort of French films or random Japanese or Chinese wuxia films that nobody else has seen, and you're just kind of making them into your own film. So yeah, like I have no problem with Pulp Fiction. It's fine. The whole Bruce Willis subplot for me is definitely the weakest part of the whole film. The dialogue is incredible in the film. I love the dialogue. It's some of the most quotable dialogue ever put the film is in Pulp Fiction. So yeah, it wouldn't be in my top 20 or my top 100, but I can understand why it's there. We already covered number 7, which is Return of the King, so we'll skip that. Next one is another one that I'll have to stay silent for. It's number 6. We have Schindler's List by Spielberg. I haven't seen Schindler's List. I'm very much not a masochist in the films that I watch. Anything that's too sort of dark, I just kind of steer away from, because I don't know, I just don't like putting myself through that kind of stuff.
I mean, it's no Cannibal Holocaust.
But what is?
But what is? Okay, so we were talking about emotional manipulation earlier. And I think, we in our Discord, we have a member who's really big on being kind of anti-Spielberg, because he's the king of emotional manipulation, kind of using music and using dialogue to really manipulate the emotions of the viewers. And I think Schindler's List is probably top of the mountain of that. But how do you talk bad about a movie that's trying to give an honest and harsh portrayal of one of the most troubling parts of recent history, right? I mean, it's a relatively true story, right? To a lot of extent, and it's very well constructed, and it's heartbreaking, and I mean, how do you possibly shit on Schindler's List? I'm not going to be the one to do it. If it's in people's top 10, I'm not going to fight with them on it. I'm glad that Spielberg's bringing some awareness to some of these horrible things that happened in the in the 40s, and yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much all I want to say about it. From objectively, it's ranked 223, and They Shoot Pictures.
Is it too high? Is it too high? Go on.
I mean, I wouldn't put it in the top 500, but I'm not gonna argue with it. How do you knock a film down that has that subject matter? It's fine.
I haven't seen Schindler's List in a long time. It's a 4.4 on Letterboxd. I remember really liking it. It's when it comes to Holocaust films, I am not one who sits there and watches them a lot. It's not just I've seen so much with it, and it's not something I just enjoy revisiting. I can't remember the director's name, but when it comes to like Holocaust films, the one who did Life is Beautiful and Boy in the Striped Pajamas. You want to talk about emotional manipulation? I think he might beat Spielberg in this one. But they're even with all three, they're all very well put together. It's got a lot, and for Spielberg, it was a big deal, obviously, because he hadn't won an Oscar at that point, and a lot. I think he had actually already gotten like a Lifetime Achievement Award, because I think the assumption was he was probably never going to get one, and he came out with this and Jurassic Park in the same year, and probably could have won for either one of them. But obviously, you're probably going to give it over to the Holocaust over dinosaurs.
Holocaust or dinosaurs? Okay, so then at number 5, we have 12 Angry Men, Sidney Lumet. I haven't seen 12 Angry Men in so long, I'll be honest. It's probably been about 10 years since I've seen 12 Angry Men, so I'm kind of struggling to remember most of it. I remember it being a really, really great film. And like I had to watch this in like English class in high school. So to get a bunch of, and I remember my whole class was engaged with it, and to get a bunch of kids, especially me and my friends, we were big messers. So to get a class engaged in a black and white film is pretty good going. So I'll give Lumet props for that. Yeah, 12 Angry Men. Do you guys have any sort of strong opposing or for feelings for 12 Angry Men?
Okay, so They Shoot Pictures, it's 519. I could easily see this being in the top 250 on They Shoot Pictures. I mean, and if you talk about influence, I think this is a gateway film to black and white for a lot of people. Like you said, for your high school class, there's a perception that black and white films are boring, and I think this really captures the audience well. I would put some of Lumet's films or Lubitsch's films as ones that I would show people if they were hesitant to get into black and white. And I, maybe I'm a little bit biased just because it was pretty influential on me doing exactly that. Kind of learning to love black and white movies, which sounds so silly to say now, but you go from Jurassic Park to some slow-moving, character-driven black and white story. It just feels like a leap. So I think this is it has such a sentimental attachment for so many people, and the story of one guy who can kind of just through patience and wit, convince 11 people to do something, I think is even more impressive nowadays, and as our countries and kind of society is getting more divisive. So, I five, maybe five we're at number five, right? Yeah,
Yeah, number 5.
probably a little high, but being in the top 20, top 30 on people's list, that wouldn't surprise me.
It is ranked 4.5 on Letterboxd. Henry Fonda's character completely bullied everyone in that jury room, and there should have been a mistrial and a retrial for that. But in all seriousness, it's a really great movie. Even if you want to ignore all the legal aspects of it, it's it comes off a lot as like a play. It's very simple. It's a lot of great performances. It's very well paced, even just to take place in one room. No, you're not really going to hear me complain about it. I think it's I'll joke about the way the jury is portrayed, but as a story and what it means a lot more than that.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, I have no problems with it being in like the top 20 or 50 or whatever. 519 probably does sound a little bit low on the sort of They Shoot Pictures list. 519 does sound a bit low. Yeah, I suppose we go from one extreme to the other now. We're kind of completely jumping off the deep end with number 4, which is another Chris Nolan film, and it's The Dark Knight. I like The Dark Knight. I like Batman. I like The Dark Knight. I saw it in theaters. It was a great film. It's not the 4th best film ever made. I'm just going to put this out there. I'm sorry if you're listening and you think it is. It is objectively not the 4th best film ever made. What do we think of? I know we're going to talk about this a little bit afterwards as to why we think the list is structured as this, but even from a perspective of recency bias, I just don't understand why it's this high. Do you guys have any inklings on this?
The internet got really huge in 2008, and I think that's a lot of it. And I mean,
okay, yeah.
Batman's cool, and I think it had a ton of people like join these type of message boards. I don't know when the forums started, but I wouldn't doubt it if it was around this time as well. Just people talking about film on IMDb, and it got tons of 10 out of 10s.
Yeah, the mystique around this movie with Heath Ledger, passing, and the people saying it's one of the greatest villains of all time, and like, I just think that it captured the imagination, and it is a very watchable film.
Sure.
It's not hard to watch, and like you were saying, Zach, I think people just, it's so easy to click like a rating, and after you just watch it, I think the impact of that movie is going to be like 9, 10, whatever. It's not a bad movie. And even if, I don't think it ages quite as well. And where the Dark Knight series, like trilogy kind of it went to some ridiculous places, but, this is, I think it's another one of those ones that's very watchable.
Batman Begins is better.
You what?
Batman Begins is better.
Heard it here first.
Okay, that's a hot take, yeah.
Well, I think Heath Ledger's Joker is what elevates Dark Knight, but I think as like story structure and everything else, Batman Begins is better.
Yeah, Dark Knight's hasn't had the best pacing. I think I told you this story before, and I think I maybe even mentioned it when we were talking about Chris Nolan before on a previous podcast, about how when I saw this in the theater, and after the Joker gets captured after flipping the truck, my friends got up to leave. And I was like, I don't think the film is done, guys. And there's like an hour left of the film after that. So I definitely don't think it's the most well-paced film in the world. And The Dark Knight Rises is even more guilty of that.
Yeah, I have no idea where I would put this in my list. It wouldn't be in the top 20.
No, it wouldn't be in the top 100 for me, even 200 probably.
It's a 4.4 on Letterboxd. I can't remember if I said that or not.
No,
I don't know what is it on yours, Chris?
They Shoot Pictures has it at 606.
No, sorry.
Even that feels like a stretch. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. If you talk about cultural impact, I think it's similar to The Matrix in cultural impact.
Yeah, for sure. I'm just trying to look and see what's it better than. So apparently it's higher than both The Two Towers and Inception, significantly so. And I don't think that's right, personally. Okay, we can probably talk about The Dark Knight all day. So we'll move on to. We're going to do a double for number 3 and number 2 because it's The Godfather Part 2 comes in at number 3. And The Godfather comes in at number 2, confusingly enough as it is. Obviously, Francis Ford Coppola. Yeah. Now, this might be film blasphemy. I've only seen the first Godfather. I haven't seen the second, so I can't really talk too much about that one. But
we need
yeah,
to do a watch party and change that immediately.
no, the first Godfather is incredible. It's an incredible achievement from a filmmaking point of view, in terms of what Coppola was able to, just what he was able to achieve with a book that wasn't even all that well received. Mario Puzo's book.
It's very pulpy, and I'll get into that in a minute. How pulpy that book is.
And he made something very elegant, and he made it almost like if you look at maybe like a period drama and how they depict royalty and things like that. Coppola was able to get that same kind of feeling, with the mafia in this film, and I think he does a great job of really making an elegant film after, out of such pulpy material. And again, it's not in my top 20, but I have no problem with people putting these films in the top 20.
Zach, sounds like you have a lot to say about it. So if you don't mind, just quickly, I'll say Godfather Part 2 comes in at number 26 on They Shoot Pictures, and Godfather comes in at number 7. I think it just goes back to influence. These films have been sort of paid homage to. They've been parodied. They're just a part of culture. They're a part of the, anybody who's ever seen movies has seen at least Godfather 1. I'll say that now. Or if you haven't seen them, you can quote certain parts and certain scenes, and about them. The names of the characters, and it's a movie that anybody can watch and enjoy, and at the same time, an artistically well-made film. And that balance is just so hard to strike. So I get it why it's ranked so high. And yeah, I mean, it's not in my top 20, but I totally get why they're ranked so high.
So on Letterboxd, Godfather 1 is 4.6. On Part 2 is 4.5. So it has in the same order, first and then second, which I know is contentious among people who watch the Godfather films. I do agree. I like the first one better. Just to give a little background on how I got into watching The Godfather was I actually played the PS2 game first.
Oh, wow.
And then from there, I read the book, and then I watched the movie.
That's a crazy way to go about that.
So I did it completely backwards. And I just want to give perspective of how pulpy, because I've read a lot of Mario Puzo stuff, and I got it because I like The Godfather. I've read his Last Dawn and stuff like that. He's a fun writer. Good, I wouldn't say that. I think he's actually a really good screenwriter, but for novels, not so much. There is an entire subplot in the Godfather book, and they only kind of hint at it in the movie. But the girl Sonny is sleeping with, that's at the wedding, she has an entire subplot in the movie, in the book, I mean, where the reason she's sleeping with Sonny is because Sonny's very well endowed, and basically her vaginal cavity is too wide, and she actually has to get surgery within the book to fix that, and it actually goes into Johnny Fontaine because he had the same exact surgeon who can apparently do vaginal surgery and throat surgery. That should give you a good perspective of what this book is like. It's insanity.
What the hell? Who even thinks of that stuff?
Mario Puzo does.
Very good.
But the movies are fantastic. I don't have them in my top 10 today just because I tried to make a little bit of a rule not to have too much overlap. But normally, yeah, The Godfather is probably a top 5, a top 10 movie for me, and I love the second one as well, even though I don't have it in my top 20. But just I love The Godfather. I always have.
Yeah, definitely. Just like Chris said, it's one of those films that is just completely, it's in the zeitgeist. People know about it even if they haven't seen it. Like, even if it's something as simple as I don't know if you guys have seen the Family Guy sketch where Peter says he doesn't like The Godfather. If you haven't seen that skit, it's one of the funniest skits Family Guy ever did. It's pretty early in their run, maybe season 4 or 5. And Peter says he doesn't like The Godfather, and everyone just rips him for it. And his reasons for not, it insists upon itself as his reasoning for not liking The Godfather. It insists upon itself. Even if you haven't seen like The Godfather itself, you just kind of know it exists, and the whole, Marlon Brando, you come to me on the day of my daughter's wedding, expecting me to kill a man I do not know. Like, it's just one of those films that are just so ingrained in popular culture that you just can't possibly ignore them.
Exactly.
Okay, so that brings me to number 1.
Oh, I think this is gonna be fun.
Yeah, this is one of my biggest pet peeves in life.
Why are you kicking your knuckles right now?
Yeah, this is just this film being so well respected and so well beloved is just one of my biggest pet peeves. It's The Shawshank Redemption by Frank Darabont, and this film should be nowhere near anybody's top 20, top 50, top 100. It's just it's the most mediocre film. Like and I say mediocre from the point of view that it's just completely overrated. And I don't know, I just don't understand why. There's no nostalgic value to this film from what I can tell. You know, maybe it was shown on TV a lot when people were growing up. Maybe that's it. But it doesn't tell a story of like something like Schindler's List where it's like an important historical story. It doesn't have anything like that about it. It's just this pretty normal story of a guy wrongly convicted and he tries to escape from prison. Like, who gives a shit? I'm sorry, but like, I just and the film, and from a filmmaking standpoint, not even from a plot standpoint, but from a filmmaking standpoint, there's nothing special about this film at all. Nothing at all special about it. And I'll stop ranting now because I'll just get worked up.
Okay, so They Shoot Pictures has it at 473. And even that feels a little high. The only thing I can think about there was a thread on Reddit, a comment thread a few weeks back where people were joking about how Godfather used to be number one, and then a bunch of people that like Lord of the Rings, just to kind of troll The Godfather, gave it a 1 star so that it would lower the rating down. And then I'm sorry, not Lord of the Rings, Dark Knight, and then a bunch of people that like The Dark Knight, that like The Godfather, gave The Dark Knight a 1 star rating just to knock that down. And then the result was that Shawshank Redemption got benefited from that.
The least offensive one won.
There's no logical explanation for this to be number one all time. We're not going to find it here in this podcast. There's no logical explanation other than it's the film that like I just feel like people have seen for one way or another. Like a lot of people see it and they know about it, and it's like maybe just enough to sort of give it a high rating. But I'm not. This is one of those ones that doesn't make any sense. Like, of course, it's not the best film ever made. Like, it's not. There's no world in which this is the best film ever. So, I think this is just going to be a head scratcher for me. An M. Night Shyamalan mystery.
It is a 4.4 on Letterboxd, which is high.
Yeah.
For whatever reason.
I thought if there was going to be one that would be 4 or under, this would be it. But no, obviously not.
No, Matrix was the closest. Now, here's what I will say about Shawshank Redemption. It is the second best prison adaptation by Stephen King that Frank Darabont ever directed.
There you go.
You're not wrong.
I mean, it's fine. It's we've talked about this on other podcasts about inoffensive movies. This is one. I mean, it's got like it's melodramatic. It's got good scenes. The acting's good. I mean, it's almost like a checkbox movie. Like it does everything pretty well. It just doesn't do anything great. Like that's how I just kind of feel about it. Like everything's competent and it's fine. It's fun for what it is.
It's just like a scoop of vanilla ice cream. Like it's fine. Nobody's gonna give out about it, but nobody should be writing home about it at the same time. It's just a big scoop of vanilla.
That's the finest of the flavors.
There's this thing it's an outdated reference now because it's not as common anymore. But 20 years ago, home telemarketing was a big deal. So like literally people calling into your home trying to sell you like medicines and just random things.
Yeah.
There was this kind of joke or kind of observation that the best people at those jobs were the ones that stuck to the script exactly. They took no liberties with the script. It was like if the people that were the best at that job were the ones that never deterred from the script. And this feels to me kind of like that. Like it's a movie that's like there's not a lot of creativity. There's not a lot of liberties taken. It's just like straight down the line of like kind of making a movie. It's the film equivalent to a successful sale of calling into someone's home and selling some medicine, telemarketing.
And do we feel? I'm just trying to make sense to why it's so high, and I can kind of like this is the problem with things like IMDb sort of user scored lists, because like you said, the internet is such a vast place. You can get 10,000 people together to go and downvote something if you don't like it. So, trying to find a reason for it being so high is kind of tricky because of that, what you were saying before about, The Godfather and The Dark Knight duking it out. But it's not even that. It's like you'll meet people and they'll say, "Oh, my favorite film is The Shawshank Redemption." And I've had this conversation with people in work. We've talked about films people like, and people always bring up Shawshank Redemption and Fight Club and The Green Mile and stuff like that. And it's at the point where I'm kind of thinking, is this almost like an echo chamber where people look at IMDb and they see Shawshank Redemption's #1, highest rated, so they watch it. And because it's not a bad movie, they kind of go, "Oh yeah, I understand why this is #1. This wasn't bad." And it just kind of sort of becomes an echo chamber where people watch it because it's #1, and because the film doesn't suck, they just assume, okay, yeah, that's #1. And then they give it a good review as well. And it just kind of goes on and on forever in that kind of sense.
Yeah, and I could see that, especially since like Letterboxd, which is a little bit more recent, it doesn't have it nearly as high. It still has it higher than I would, but that could still be like leftover from IMDb. Like, oh yeah, that's my favorite. So on Letterboxd, I put it as a 5.
See, but I think the Letterboxd and IMDb debate is kind of more. I think IMDb is just a bit more for the casual viewer, which is why you'll normally see foreign films, art films sort of ranked a lot lower because they just get less votes compared to like Letterboxd. Like, we'll talk about the top 10 or top 20 Letterboxd films in a moment, but if we just take one from that list, The Human Condition Part 3, like it's definitely not in the top 250 of IMDb. I'd stake my reputation on it, and I would be surprised if the overall rating was any way above an 8.5. It's probably more to like an 8.1 or an 8.2. So yeah, I think Letterboxd is sort of geared more towards people who, I don't want to make it sound elitist, but people who sort of take film a bit more seriously, whereas IMDb is just a bit more casual. And it wasn't always that way. Obviously, IMDb used to be the place to go, but obviously, I think with Letterboxd coming out and sort of getting, even though Letterboxd has probably been out for about 10 years itself, it's just gotten a lot more popular in the past sort of 5 or 6. That it seems to be the place to go for sort of cinema lovers to go and rank and review their films versus IMDb.
Yeah. I think it just, we've kind of been touching on this a little bit now throughout this whole conversation, but I just feel like there's something that happens when you're 14, 15, 16. If you're the kind of person that likes movies, regardless of what type, like going to see Transformers in theater or whatever, if you're the kind of person that just chooses that as a hobby, at some point you're going to see a movie that's going to rock your world a little bit, right? And I think that which movie that is fairly represented in this list in different ways, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think this kind of goes into what we've talked about before with bias with rankings, and not just IMDb. I think Rotten Tomatoes kind of has the opposite problem of IMDb, because obviously IMDb is for people who have just watched a film and they think it's great and they want to rank it, or they think it's crap and they want to unrank it. And you get a lot of recency bias with that, because obviously mainly people are going to watch current stuff. And then Rotten Tomatoes on the sort of opposite spectrum. If you're looking at a review for a classic film on Rotten Tomatoes, so like if you look up the review for like a Bergman film, it's nearly always going to be 100%, because you're going to be reading a review from someone now reviewing a movie from the past. It's not a contemporary review.
Mm-hmm.
And if the film wasn't good in the past, nobody's going to be watching it now.
Mm-hmm.
So you get bias on either end of the spectrum. So something like, They Shoot Pictures is probably a really good sort of litmus test for where a film should really be, because it's such a huge database of sort of aggregated reviews. It's better than looking at something like IMDb or even Rotten Tomatoes. And I've just noticed a bit of an issue with IMDb that I don't think we've addressed, and that is how IMDb even do their top 250. It's not just by score. You have to have a minimum threshold of how many votes a film can have. Because obviously, if I released a film and I was the only one who reviewed it and I reviewed a 10 out of 10, it's not going to become the best film on IMDb.
Mhm.
And I've just noticed the problem while I was looking, because I mentioned I was curious about what score The Human Condition 3 is. The Human Condition 3 has an 8.8 on IMDb. The Matrix is an 8.7. But yet The Matrix is in the list and Human Condition isn't, because The Matrix has over a million people have ranked The Matrix, or it's only 5,000
Yeah.
have ranked Human Condition.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably a big sway. The more, it's not really about recency as well as popularity is going to sway you in a direction as well.
So the most popular films that have an artistic or interesting angle to them.
Essentially, so yes, that's where it seems to be. And then you have weird outliers like Shawshank Redemption, which doesn't really have a lot of artistic merits. It's just a pretty mediocre. Well, from a filmmaking perspective, it's just fine. But yeah, a lot of time it just needs to be, if you're anyway artistically inclined but also super mainstream, then you tend to end up sort of more towards the top end of the list.
In that case, I'm surprised there's not more representation from the MCU on there. But
Well, I think there is if you look. Well, see, the problem again with MCU is that you get all the DC boo boys going and rating it 1.
that's true.
So this is, again, there's so much bias involved with lists and with rankings that involve people scoring them and people having the free will to score them whatever the effect they want. It skews lists entirely. So I think the point we can kind of make from this ranking and sort of talking about these rankings is, you just can't take lists like this at face value, because there's always going to be some kind of underlying bias that skews things one way or another.
Yeah, it's so if IMDb is skewed more toward watchability as a gross blanketing statement there, should I just quickly run down the 20 for?
I was going to say, yeah, let's run down the top 20s for both They Shoot Pictures and for Letterboxd. They Shoot Pictures is going to be a good one to look at, because it's going to be a lot of I'm sure most of the people who do these lists are critics or scholars in some degree, so
Exactly.
we're probably going to get a lot more representation of what's important or what's more artful. And then Letterboxd will be interesting because, again, it's public forum based, but it's more for people who are watching maybe a bit more obscure stuff. So yeah, we'll run through the They Shoot Pictures first just to see. So we know ourselves before we start that we're only going to see Seven Samurai and The Godfather Part 1 in this list. So let's see what else is showing up there.
And then just as like a one sentence kind of background, if we're thinking watchability on IMDb, They Shoot Pictures is probably a similar bias, except for this is somebody putting a public stamp on their top 100. So their bias is going to be towards being seen as a reputable critic, right? So there's going to be a little bit of a bias there around making sure you include Citizen Kane, for example, right? Regardless of what you think about the movie,
Yeah.
like that's probably where the bias is on a list like this, right? And so it's going to be number 20 is Siga Vertov's Man with a Movie Camera,
Okay.
1929 Russian film. Then number 19 is Ingmar Bergman's Persona from 1966. Number 18 is Carl Theodor Dreyer's The Passion of Joan of Arc from 1928.
Probably the best lead performance in a film ever. So yeah.
Yeah. Number 17 is Jean Vigo's L'Atalante.
Yes, great film.
1934. Yep. Number 16 is Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless.
Okay, interesting.
Number 15 is something that Zach has mentioned a couple of times here today, is Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver from 1976. Then number 14 is Sergei Eisenstein's Battleship Potemkin from 1925. Number 13 is Vittorio De Sica's Bicycle Thieves, 1948.
That's a film again that elicits emotional reaction.
Definitely. Couple directors on this next one, but the one that's first billed is Stanley Donen for Singing in the Rain from 1952, coming in at number 12. I think it's interesting that that's so high.
It's high in Sight and Sound as well. It's in the top 20 for Sight and Sound, top 250 as well.
Interesting. I mean, it's good, but that's interesting. Number 11 is Francis Ford Coppola with Apocalypse Now. It does not mention which cut, so I'm assuming they're talking about theatrical cut, which is probably a little bit
the superior cut.
Yeah, exactly. 1979. Then we start in the top 10. So we've already mentioned Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai from 1954. Right after that is Kurosawa's muse, John Ford, with his sort of the film that he's most known for, The Searchers from 1956. Then for me, one of my favorite movies, the film that actually got me into silent films, number 8, is F.W. Murnau's Sunrise.
Great film.
Yeah, 1927. I feel like that should be a must-see. It just completely breaks down, I think, what most people assume a silent film is.
Yeah, for sure. It's so the camera work and the editing and the sort of clever effects is incredible in that film.
Yeah, totally. We mentioned number 7, The Godfather, from Francis Ford Coppola in 1972. Then we get into Federico Fellini's 8½, 1963, coming in at number 6. I have no problem that being the best movie about filmmaking.
Fair, yeah.
No problem. Debatable whether or not I put it that high, but anyways, it's certainly, I understand why. Then we get into a lot of filmmakers' favorite filmmaker, Yasujiro Ozu, with Tokyo Story.
Great film again. Another emotional film.
Yeah, coming out number 5. Probably what I assume is going to be a more controversial one for people that are in Jean Renoir's Rules of the Game, coming in at number 4.
I never got that. I always thought The Grand Illusion was better.
Honestly, me too. But anyways, what do we know? But it's a really good movie for sure. But just if you think about how many people had to vote it high for it to be number 4 of all time.
Yeah.
Then a little bit of Kubrick love. Number 3 is going to be 2001: Space Odyssey from 1968. And then Alfred Hitchcock's film Vertigo, again, or it's not again, 1958. We just happen to have seen a lot of movies from 1958 in the film club. It's kind of funny.
So many.
Yeah, it's a good year for film. That's number 2. And then the almost unanimous number 1 movie of all time by critics is Citizen Kane from Orson Welles from 1941. So there you go.
It's interesting, the films in that list. I know the Sight and Sound top 250 nearly off by heart. A lot of the films you mentioned, I'm pretty sure they're all the exact same films that are in Sight and Sound, the top 20 of that, just in a slightly different order. So there seems to be obviously a major consensus. Obviously, Sight and Sound is obviously sort of done very similarly to Two-Day Shoot Pictures. They get like hundreds of critics and filmmakers and everything like that to put together their top 10s and do a weighted scoring and everything like that. And they do it every 10 years. They get together and do a new ranking. So I'm kind of, I suppose in a way I'm not really surprised it's ended up being the same films, but yeah, slightly different ranking. So I'm interested to see what Letterboxd is going to be, because I think it's going to be completely different.
You are correct. Chris, you did a great job pronouncing all those directors' names. I can't do that unless you want me to butcher about 7 different languages. So we're just going to go with the titles. Number 20 is Schindler's List.
Okay.
Number 19 is Goodfellas. Number 18 is The Human Condition Part 1. And we've already mentioned Part 3 is on there. Part 2 is number 43. I went ahead and checked.
Okay, cool.
So they're all in top 50. The Dark Knight is number 17. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is number 16.
Okay.
Portrait of a Lady on Fire is 15. Yi Yi is 14. Adam's favorite movie, The Shawshank Redemption, is 13. The 4-hour Brighter Summer Day is number 12.
Okay.
High and Low is number 11. Spirited Away is the highest animated film at number 10. The Human Condition Part 3 is number 9. I'm not going to pronounce the actual name of this, but it's Spanish for a dog's will. O Auto da. I don't know. It's some movie I've never heard of.
I've never heard of that film.
Number 7 is 12 Angry Men. Number 6 is 7 Samurai. Number 5 is The Godfather Part 2. Number 4 is Harakiri. Is that how you say that?
Harakiri.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Number 3 is The Godfather. Number 2 is Come and See. And number 1 is Parasite.
Okay, right. That's such a super interesting list, because you get a lot. There's a lot of stuff in there that's also in the IMDb top 20, like The Godfathers, The Dark Knight. You mentioned Goodfellas. There's a few. There's a bit of overlap, and then you have almost the kind of films that are in the Criterion subreddit echo chamber, which is Edward Yang, which is Yi Yi and Brighter Summer's Day. So you have a lot of, and then Come and See as well, which I assume is a lot of recency bias because Criterion released that so recently, and it was a film that was not available for so long. A lot of people have now jumped on it and seen it, and therefore have given it a really good rating. So that's super interesting.
75,000 members have seen it. I'm actually surprised at that number for Come and See. That's actually really high.
See, it was just one of those films that was wanted for so long. I'm sure there's so many people have bought it. And obviously now that there's a Blu-ray available for it, I'm sure there's plenty of high definition illegal streams available for it too. That's such an interesting list. It's so random.
Yeah, I love Parasite too. That was in my top 2 of 2019. I absolutely love the film, but
Same.
I was just so surprised by number 1. Like, it's not my favorite Bong Joon-ho film. We'll actually get to that here shortly. But it's a great film. I just like number 1, like a film that's 2 years old.
But it's funny, like two of my top 2 favorite films of 2019 are both in there. The Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which is probably it's definitely one of my favorite films of the last 10 years. It's an incredible piece of filmmaking. And Parasite was my second favorite of that year. But yeah, to be in the top 20 of all time is probably a little bit contentious. And again, it's a lot of recency bias coming in there too.
So just as a quick tangent, but to the point of like who's using and kind of who's watching, who's using these platforms and who's rating, that film you mentioned, A Dog's Will, Zach, is a Brazilian movie from 2000, I believe, or 2001. Yeah, 2000. And this brings up a point that, I mean, actually, I've never heard of it. But it brings up a point where it's interesting. Imagine what would happen if either China, India, or Brazil was really active on IMDb or Letterboxd, right?
You see that with IMDb, though. There's a lot of Bollywood films in the top 250. There's about 3 or 4 that nobody outside of India has seen it. So yeah, it's definitely, if there was a lot of people from those countries using it a lot more, I think it would be a hell of a lot more skewed than what it already is.
Yeah. So anyways, that's, this is a Western biased list, right? Compiled from people that watch these movies and sort of learn about like the history of film and what's interesting and important. But I mean, anyways, I'm describing my worldview, so I like these movies. I guess I'm not using that as a derogatory thing. It just kind of shows what's going into it, I guess.
No, that was interesting to see the comparison because, like the one you had, your list for the They Shoot Pictures is pretty much like, that's like a critic's list. That's like if you were an artist or a film historian, that's like, you're going to pick those movies because they're so important to the history of cinema. And I'm surprised maybe 1 or 2 are not in there. Night of the Hunter, cough cough. But I'm sure it just missed out. And then obviously your list from Letterboxd is just very random. It's either super popular films, like even like Into the Spider-Verse, which I think is great. It's probably the best animated film in the last 10 years. It's a really, really good film. It's not in the top 20 best films ever made. Like, let's be real. And then obviously Parasite and things like that in there too. And then obviously IMDb just seems to be sort of very purely mainstream outside of like Seven Samurai. Seems to be like.
And as far as Asian movies go, that's probably about as mainstream as you're going to get. Seven Samurai.
Yeah, except for like maybe like Studio Ghibli films. Like, in terms of live action, then Seven Samurai is probably one that most people have heard of. Whereas all the rest of the movies on that list, pretty much everyone has seen all of them except for maybe a handful. Like you've probably, I think, did you guys say you've seen every film on that list on the IMDb top 20?
Mm-hmm.
You probably did too, and I was missing maybe 2 or 3. So, a lot of people have seen these movies, so it probably attests to their popularity. Yeah. Cool. Well, look, before we wrap up this special episode, we thought it'd be fun just to put together our own sort of top 10 films. So we're just going to go through our own like top 10 lists. We're not going to go too in depth as to why we think they're in the top 10. We are going to put these up on the website. They'll be up shortly after this episode airs, where we might go a little bit more in depth as to why we picked them. But yeah, we're just going to give our own top tens just to see if we can maybe compare them to any of the other lists we've been talking about. I think my list is probably going to be more closer to the They Shoot Pictures one than the other two. But yeah, anyone want to volunteer to go first?
Yeah, because y'all's will probably we'll get mine out of the way. So I'm going to start. I did cheat a little bit on my number 3 pick. I'm just going to go ahead and throw that out there. I couldn't make a decision. So I'm going to start from 10 and go up. My number 10 was Mel Gibson's Apocalypto.
Okay.
Number 9 was Memories of Murder. Number 8, George Miller's Mad Max Fury Road. Number 7 is There Will Be Blood. Number 6 is Tremors.
Okay.
I had to look at the face. I just had to say. Number 5 is Oh Brother Where Art Thou. Number 4 is John Carpenter's The Thing. My number 3, I couldn't pick between Apocalypse Now and The Godfather, so they're kind of split. Number 3. My number 2 is The Good and the Bad and the Ugly, and my number 1 is John Carpenter's Halloween.
Okay. There's no bad films on that. Well, Tremors is maybe questionable. That's kind of one of those so good it's bad, or so bad it's good.
We should have a podcast about that because I actually believe it's just a legitimately great film. Not like a so good it's not so bad it's good. I think it's just legitimately great.
I genuinely haven't seen Tremors since I was a kid, so it's one of those ones I need to rewatch. Especially now that Arrow have like a release of it. It's one of those ones I definitely need to rewatch because I think actually I'm gonna buy this weekend because I know my dad would love to watch it as well because we watched it together when I was a kid. So I know that he would love to watch
4K transfer looks great.
Yeah, so I think Tremors one I need to rewatch. Well, I actually have one in common with you, Zach, on my list. So I'll go next if that's okay with you, Chris. So number 10 is Abbas Kiarostami's Where's the Friend's House. Number 9 is Agnes Varda's Le Bonheur. Number 8 is John Carpenter's Halloween. Number 7 is Powell and Pressburger's The Red Shoes. Number 6 is David Lynch's Mulholland Drive. Number 5 is Ingmar Bergman's Persona. Number 4 is Fritz Lang's M. Number 3, Ridley Scott's Blade Runner. Number 2, Charles Laughton's Night of the Hunter. And number 1 is the best film ever made, which is Vertigo by Alfred Hitchcock. So we did have one in common, Zach.
We did. I'm actually surprised.
God bless Halloween. It's so good.
Now, will Chris finish it up and also have Halloween on his list?
All right. Yeah. Anyways, we can discuss more of these later, or we can, if anybody listening wants to comment and ask what the hell, that's fine for any of these movies. But it's a big mix for me. Number 10 is going to be Godard's A Woman is a Woman.
Brilliant. Love it.
Number 9 is going to be Monty Python's Life of Brian.
Okay.
Number 8 is going to be Wojciech's Haas's Saragossa manuscript.
Never heard of it, but okay.
Yeah, number 7 is Goodbye Lenin, which, well, anyways, I guess obviously I'm encouraging people to watch all.
Is Daniel Brühl in that film? Or am I thinking of a different film?
I don't know off the top of my head. It's about the kid who his mom can't afford to have another shock to her system. She's kind of sick. And she wakes up from a coma right when the Berlin Wall fell, and she's kind of pro-East German.
So it is a German film.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I looked it up. Yeah, Daniel Brühl is in that. I'm pretty sure I've seen that film.
Anyways, it's super sweet and probably emotionally manipulative, but I'm a sucker for that stuff. Next is a little bit of a cheat. I'm including Bergman's Scenes from a Marriage, even though I wouldn't put the movie in the top 10. The TV series is there, so I'm going to cheat and just put the movie there so people watch the TV show. Then we get down to Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie, because I had to put a Buñuel film in there. I love everything that guy does. And then finishing up is Spike Jonze' Adaptation. And then 2 films by Kurosawa. Number 3 is Ikiru. And then, Rashomon is my number 1. But then number 2 coming in is the Decalogue series from Kieślowski.
So 2 TV series in your top 10 movies. Basically.
Take it as one 10-hour movie. The Decalogue is one 10-hour movie, I guess.
Yeah.
I think Adam was the only one who didn't cheat on his list.
That's
yeah.
right.
You guys, come on. No, I was having such a struggle putting together 10. Like I kept out so many films. I'm sure you guys did as well. It's so hard to put together a 10. And then you're trying to be maybe not be, not try and lump too much of the same thing in. Like I was saying to the guys before we started recording, that if I was to do my top 10, I could have just done like 10 Bergman films, and that would have been pretty boring if I just listed off 10 Bergman films. So I did try and mix it up a little bit. Cool. Well, look, this episode was a lot of fun. I hope it was a lot of fun to listen to as well, and it didn't come off too pretentious. We're gonna be having more of these special episodes come up. I hope you enjoyed the interview we did with Def Crocodile a couple of weeks ago. That was a lot of fun for us, and we're hoping to have more of that kind of stuff going forward as well. Yeah, for now, I think we'll wrap it up, guys. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.